So again, welcome to our first 2021 Small Business Ambassador Network webinar. We have a great panel for you all today, going to key up what we think we'll be seeing this year in the state legislatures as well as Congress. So as you all must be very familiar with the Small Business Ambassador Network since you are members. In today's discussion, we are going to talk about, we'll have Kevin Callahan and Shana Brown talk about the state legislatures and what will be happening there. And then we'll be talking with Matt Jensen and Ashley Schillingsberg about what we should expect from the Biden administration as well as Congress. So let's get started.
Hey everyone, before we jump into the state legislative update, we want to go ahead and we're going to launch a poll. We're really interested. We have a couple of polls for you guys today to look at and give us some feedback. You should see the poll pop up on your screen. Our question that we're interested for this first one is, what are you most looking forward to in 2021? If you could just go ahead and pick whatever answer choice fits best for this one. We ask that you only choose one answer. And once you click your answer, your poll should just disappear completely and you should have no farther instructions or things to do. So we'll give it a couple of seconds and then we'll turn it over to Kevin and Shana. Awesome. It looks like the majority of everyone has answered. So I'll go ahead and I will turn it over to Kevin and Shana to get us started on a state legislative update. Shana, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shana Brown and I manage state government relations in the West. We're really excited to have you all here today to give an overview of what we are seeing happening in the states. I think that, that poll reminded me one of the fun parts of my job is getting to travel to these state legislatures in a quote unquote normal year. That's not a possibility right now. So I do look forward to things opening up and getting back to sort of business as usual when that's possible. As you'll see here, 48 states have convened their 2021 sessions. Only 2 have yet to start, which means that Kevin and I are very busy tracking legislation in all of our states, and we have pretty big portfolios of issues. Anything that impacts, eBay as a corporation, but then most importantly, the impacts to small businesses that operate on our site. So, I think that this climate for 2021 is a different year. Last year was a little bit different, and this year is, proving to, show a different set of issues that legislators really care about. The virus response. COVID-19 vaccinations are top of mind for many legislatures. And so that has definitely taken up a lot of space. They definitely are also feeling, most states are feeling, budget deficits, and the states are looking for ways to add revenue. And so we are closely monitoring a lot of that activity. And I think that it's the political and social climate at large that we take our work, and then we also have to then zoom in on tech-related issues and issues related to small businesses. I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Shana. Hey, everybody. Kevin Callahan. I'm Shana's counterpart. I am based in Washington, D.C., but work on kind of the eastern part of the country as well as Texas. And so I do get out a good bit. It's great to see some familiar names on today's webinar. But picking up where Shana left off, obviously it's a very different year with COVID certainly being the overarching issue. that's impacting just how legislatures are operating. So in a normal year, like Shana said, we'd certainly get the opportunity to be in some of the state capitals to talk about eBay, to share some of your stories, and ideally get to join you all as we talk about issues that matter to our eBay community. But it's a different year, so in-person access is extremely limited. But as a number of state capitals have shut down, they've moved to a virtual setting, which is actually not necessarily a bad thing, I suppose, if you're a policy wonk and are interested in seeing how the sausage gets made in your state capital. You actually probably get a lot more access than you ever would have before. So if you are interested in watching some of the legislative hearings and some of the goings on, feel free to reach out to Shana or I or Christiana, and we can definitely get you some information. But it's created kind of a new way to approach some of the state legislators, and that's through virtual engagement, much like we're doing today, and which hopefully we get to bring that opportunity to many of you here throughout the year. And so already we're working on different opportunities to engage via Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever the platform is, just to talk to legislators. And frankly, it's afforded, or it can afford, I think, greater opportunity to talk about some of these issues that really matter. And one of the issues that is especially important is certainly some of the economic recovery efforts. And so already we're seeing opportunities to get engaged in how some of the states are helping small businesses and entrepreneurs really not only get through the COVID crisis, but also thrive on the other end and really be a part of kind of the future of the economy and the recovery. So that kind of paints the overall landscape. Let's dive into some of these specific issues that will impact us. Thanks, Christiana. So always tops on our list, of course, is kind of the tax issues. And I know on a number of times we've talked a lot about the IST impacts, and certainly we've seen a lot of states have taken this on since the Wayfair decision in June of 2018. 42 states now have requirements on the books for eBay to collect on transactions on our platform. We have about 3 left. So Florida, Kansas, and Missouri are sort of the remaining few. These are also kind of unique because they haven't moved to adopt remote seller requirements separate from having the marketplaces collect. So legislation has been introduced in all 3 of those states. Florida has 2 pieces of legislation that are kind of making their way through the process. Remains to be seen if they will pass this session, but there certainly is a lot of momentum behind them right now. So we're taking part in some conversations there. Kansas is a state that had actually implemented a remote seller requirement, but it had a $0 threshold, which kind of differed from the Wayfair decision. So there's some legislation to kind of up that threshold to $100,000 in sales. And also they're looking at marketplace facilitator legislation next week. They'll have some hearings. Missouri is a state where there is a lot of discussion on this. This is a priority of the governor there, and there's 11 different pieces of legislation right now, all with different requirements. So it's a little confusing to peel it all back, but there are a few pieces of legislation that I think are getting a little bit more attention. And so certainly Missouri will be a state that we're watching closely and is very likely to pass something this session. They've considered bills the last 3 years, but had not passed anything. So it's something that we're watching in Missouri. Moving on to the digital advertising taxes, this is sort of a emerging issue. Last year, we saw states like Maryland, which adopted a piece of legislation that would impose taxes on digital advertisements. So think about if you were to advertise on different digital platforms, Facebook, Google, potentially even eBay. So there is some concern about this sort of legislation taking hold. Right now, Maryland is scheduled for a vote on that particular piece of legislation next week. And if they were passed, Maryland would move forward and likely start taxing digital advertisements. It's likely to face some legal challenges, but it remains to be seen how that vote will play out next week. There are also a number of states who are looking at Maryland to possibly adopt similar types of legislation. New York, Washington, Illinois, also Oregon have considered different pieces of legislation around this, but all eyes are on Maryland to see what happens there. And then next is also sort of an issue that we saw probably a long time ago, like over 10 years ago, but it's making its way back in both Congress and states. And might defer to my colleague, Matt, to speak about the congressional issue, but in the states, we're seeing an effort primarily led by retailers for the stated intent of combating organized retail crime or shoplifting and counterfeits appearing on online marketplaces. And so one of the solutions that they're proposing is for marketplaces to gather extensive information about each so-called high volume seller. So by definition, they are calling those sellers to have 200 transactions or $5,000 worth of business in any calendar year. So that's everybody on this webinar and thousands, if not millions of others across all the different platforms out there who would be subject to providing this additional information. They would not be able to list their products on the site if that information was not verified. So it's certainly in the early stages in a number of states. It's got a lot of different problems, I think, and we've been spending some time educating legislators as those bills get considered in a handful of states. But we'll certainly have some more information about those types of bills when they come up. Last year, Louisiana considered similar legislation, and as part of the eBay Main Street community, I think over 2,000 emails were sent throughout the Louisiana legislature to push back on some of the onerous requirements that this would have had on sellers that really favored big box retailers who were pushing the legislation. So thank you all for your efforts there, and we'll certainly be in touch as these issues or these bills gain a little bit more traction in some of the states. I'll hand it back to Shana for the last two.
Thanks, Kevin. Next on our list is product liability. We saw this bill in California last year, and we were successful in defeating it. And we're grateful for our California SBN members that did help with outreach to elected officials. We had over 4,000 letters submitted to elected officials. And I think that, we've always talked about that impact is really important. They want to hear from you, their constituents. We are likely to see this issue again in California. And this basically would make a marketplace liable for all products sold on their site. eBay at any given time has 1.8 billion products in circulation. So the unintended consequences of a measure like this is that it could potentially require a marketplace to limit product types that would be made available for sale. And it could also have increased costs for both the marketplace and for sellers. So we are opposed to product liability on the marketplace, and we are expecting to engage on this in California for the 2021 session. And we will turn to our California sellers when we do need to engage. And then the last issue that is pending right now in many states, Washington, Virginia, New York, Colorado is likely to introduce, North Dakota. So in lieu of a federal solution, many states are promoting privacy laws. And the biggest, a couple of issues that we track are uniformity. So because we're a global company, we want to make sure that there's uniformity across all of the laws. And we also want to make sure that there's a small business exemption so that small businesses are not required to comply like an eBay would have to. And then we like to make sure that there's ample time for entities to come into compliance. So we like a delayed implementation date. And another issue that we always work on is enforcement. So in sum, these are some of the big issues that we think are, that we actually know are on tap for the 2021 session. We are excited to keep you in the loop and also to have you assist us in advocacy as the session moves along, and we will definitely call on our sellers to help tell the story.
Thanks, Shane and Kevin. That was awesome. So before we go ahead and turn over to Matt and Ashley for a federal legislative update, we have another poll and question that we are really interested in getting your guys' opinion on. So it should have just launched right on your screen. So we're really curious to see what is the biggest COVID-related problem that you face at the state or federal government, or that you face that the state or federal governments could address. This answer choice, please feel free to choose more than one. We're really interested in getting as much feedback as possible on this one. It's really helpful for us to figure out not only what's going on legislative standpoint, but what you guys are interested in as well. So we'll just leave a couple of seconds for you guys to vote, and then we will move it over to Matt and Ashley. Awesome. So it looks like most of you guys have voted. Thanks. So we'll go ahead and turn that poll off. And Matt and Ashley, I will hand it over to you guys.
Thanks, Christiana. I'll get started. First off, just want to second what everyone has said. Thank you all for taking the time to tune in today and really for everything you do with our teams. It's always so great working with you. It's probably the best part of our jobs. And we're really happy to be able to provide you all this update. And as you always know, please feel free to reach out with any questions. So it's been a busy start to the year in Washington. We have a new presidential administration. As you all know, when a new president comes in, not only does he bring in his own or her own policy priorities and staff, but there is turnover at all of the agencies and the political jobs. All the secretaries of the different agencies have to go through the nomination and confirmation process in the Senate. So there's a lot of wheels churning constantly right now in Washington, but we do know from President Biden's early days a lot about what his priorities are. And obviously, number one is COVID response, both in terms of deploying additional vaccines, deploying testing capabilities, and he's been very aggressive on the next COVID stimulus package. Congress has already passed 2 stimulus packages, and those were the packages that included the PPP small business loan that we've talked with you all quite a bit about. But this package that he's proposing, a $1.9 trillion package, which would include additional small business relief and a lot else. So we're waiting to see if and how that gets through Congress. Once they get through those initial priorities, a couple of other things that we know the administration is going to be focusing on are going to be infrastructure reform, everything from roads and bridges to critical infrastructure, electric grid, broadband, which is obviously a huge issue during COVID, and something eBay is very supportive of, getting broadband out to areas that don't have it or don't have it at the speeds they need to operate a business or to go to school, or everything that everyone's doing from home online right now. Criminal justice reform is going to be a major focus of this administration, particularly following last year's unrest. Climate change, already we're seeing a number of executive orders coming from the administration related to rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, curbing emissions, different land use prohibitions for federal government land. Healthcare expansion is a very big issue during COVID, especially as so many people need health insurance, and it's really brought a lot of those issues to bear. So a lot of work to be done at the federal and state level there. We're seeing a pretty big pivot on immigration reform, and also a pretty big pivot on foreign relations, really changing the dynamic between the US and a lot of our longstanding global allies. So it's going to be a busy couple of years. Our priorities kind of are entwined in a lot of this. But let me pass it over to Matt to talk a little bit about how things look in the Senate.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Appreciate it. So it's the phrase of the year, I guess, unprecedented. So, right, there's 100 members in the Senate. There was two runoff elections in Georgia, which I think everyone's familiar with, which decided the control of the Senate. So those two Republican Georgia Senate seats flipped from Republican to Democratic, and so that put the distribution of Republicans and Democrats in the Senate at 50-50. And so because President Biden is a Democrat, he is in control of the Senate through the vice president. The vice president is the president of the Senate, actually. So the 50-50 split goes to the Democratic Party. It's kind of like baseball, tie goes to the runner. The runner is the Democratic Party here. And so only the fourth time in history we've had this, where you have to have a power sharing agreement between the minority and the majority in order to determine how the Senate works and functions on a day-to-day basis. And so the last time we had this type of agreement was in 2001. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer from New York and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, they worked for a couple of weeks in order to find an agreement, which they reached this week, which basically just outlined how they were going to operate this Congress. Which is significant, those rules that they agreed to, because it will determine how and what type of legislation is brought forward. The Senate works on a very strict precedent type rule where you have to deliberate everything, basically. And traditionally for legislation, you need about 60 votes in order to cut debate and then go to actual vote on the measure. And so, as you could tell, with 50 Democratic members, if they would like to pass something, they're going to need at least 10 Republican members to join their side in order to move forward. And so it creates a divided Congress, but we're cautiously optimistic that it will provide for opportunities of bipartisan support for measures or legislation that is important to our country. And so it's a really busy time, especially with a new administration, because the Senate is in charge of confirming cabinet positions and other high-ranking administration officials through the confirmation process. And so the Senate is really busy right now trying to confirm all of those Biden administrative appointments, political appointments. And then you throw on top of that, as Ashley mentioned, this large COVID stimulus package that they're trying to move through. And then on top of that, you have the impeachment trial, which is going to start next week for former President Trump. And so you have a lot of things moving, a lot of, let's say, constraints, but our job is to try and get things done in spite of all of those. And so we'll talk on the next slide a little bit more about that. And I think to the last point here, politics kind of runs everything, right? You have major policy initiatives that President Biden is trying to accomplish, that Majority Leader Schumer is trying to accomplish. At the end of the day, from Mitch McConnell's perspective and Chuck Schumer's perspective, they would like to control the Senate in 2022, and that's dependent on the election outcomes of 2022. And so even now, even though we just got through an election late last year, the posturing has already begun for who will control the Senate in 2022. So gear up for that. So I'll turn it over to Ashley. She'll walk through the House dynamic, and then we'll talk about implications for all of these things for eBay and small business priorities.
Thank you, Matt. Christiana, it says I can't turn on my video because the host stopped it, but I'll just start going through what's going on in the House of Representatives. So obviously you guys are pros at all of this. You understand that there are 100 House members and 435 members in the House of 100 Senate members, 435 members in the House of Representatives. It is a very close split between Democrats and Republicans this year. Democrats have been in power in the House since last Congress, but lost a number of seats. So there's a very, very slim Democratic majority in the House of Representatives. They need 218 votes in order to pass legislation. There we go. So the House often is the gas and the Senate is the brakes. A lot more members, a lot more ideas. It's easier to get things through for traditionally, and then the Senate's usually a little slower and more deliberative. That's going to be particularly true this year in this Congress, because even though something might be easy, relatively easy to pass in the House with only Democratic votes and no Republican support, if you don't have Republican buy-in, that 60 vote threshold that Matt was talking about, you're not going to be able to get that over in the Senate. So there are certain measures that can be passed with only 50 votes, but it's extremely limited. And you've probably been hearing a lot about how Democrats are trying to use that with the COVID response package. But so it's like Matt said, we're crossing our fingers for bipartisanship on a lot of this, on COVID response, on economic recovery, things like infrastructure, where both sides of the aisle have been really singing from the same song sheet for a long time. The devil's in the details, obviously. So we'll see how things go. But this year is going to be particularly interesting in the House because the president empowers party in the House generally loses seats in the midterm elections. The House, every member in the House is up every 2 years for election. The Senate gets a little bit of a breather. They have 6 years to serve. But every 2 years the House is up. It's going to be a tough year for the Democrats. It's very likely that you'll see a party flip going into next Congress. Both sides of the aisle are very aware of that. And you also have redistricting happening this election cycle. So no rest for the weary ever for those involved in politics and political campaigns. It's going to be an interesting couple of years. You can go ahead to the next slide, Christiana, and I will pass it back over to Matt.
Perfect. Thanks, Ashley. So, right, I think you all know, you all have been very involved in what we do. Proactively, we try and support bills that would support small businesses and eBay, who helps facilitate small business work, and our sellers, or we try to change or prevent bad things from happening. So fortunately, with the series of COVID packages that have been passed, there have been a number of pro small business provisions that we've been supportive of, including the PPP loans that Ashley had mentioned previously, providing flexibility for loans and economic recovery for small businesses. So we're going to see more of that going forward. From the eBay perspective, a lot of it is the positioning of how the small businesses that sell on eBay have been able to withstand or even thrive during the COVID environment. And so that'll be a really important part of the story that we tell at the federal level and state level this year, is explaining how you all have not been negatively impacted, hopefully, as a result of selling online. Hopefully it's all been positive impacts, which if it has been negative, we'd love to hear that. But so we'll be doing our best in order to explain that story. There'll be opportunities to weigh in on specific small business regulatory issues, which we would love to work with you all on in order to help tell your stories. I think, as you all know, regulators and policymakers, they like hearing it a lot better from you all, the practicers of these issues, or the appliers of these policies. So we appreciate all the great work that you all have done with us, and look forward to working with you all going forward. I'll hand it over to Ashley for great conversation about shipping and postal issues this Congress.
Issues I know no one on this call has any opinions on. So obviously, for those of you who have been working with us for a long time, Postal Service is an issue that we spend a lot of our time on, and we know that things are not great right now. The Postal Service was pretty fundamentally broken pre-COVID. It was deeply in debt. Again, all issues we've talked about. They have a number of funding requirements that make it hard for them to cover their costs, and they are in much need of reform, and they're in much need of additional funding to help them service the increased capacity, particularly in packages, again, that they were seeing pre-COVID, and just has been exacerbated so much since the beginning of the COVID crisis. So we understand that a lot of people are really frustrated with the Postal Service. We share that frustration as an organization, and we are working with them, and we're working with Congress to try to fix some of these long-standing systemic issues with the Postal Service, and to address the ongoing delay issues, which are unfortunately, they're not acceptable, but the Postal Service really doesn't seem to have the means, the desire to turn it around as quickly as we would like. So we would love to engage with you all on this. Postal reform is an issue that has been before Congress for over a decade and has not gotten any traction. I think over the past year, the politics around the Postal Service have been very front and center, as you saw the delays that were really particularly bad over the summer, and the operational changes that were made by Postmaster General DeJoy. And I think you're also seeing Postal Service is one of the most popular government institutions. It ranks up there with the military. People always love their postmaster, their service providers, but they're kind of down on the agency as a whole sometimes. But everyone really just came together around the Postal Service as frontline workers who were out there delivering for small businesses, for people who needed medicine, and people who needed, groceries. People were just getting everything through the mail. So it's possible that kind of public support may break through the issues that have held up postal reform in Congress for the last couple of years. You also have some changes in the committees that are leading these issues, which may help a little bit. But it's an issue that's been really, really hard to get through Congress, and we've been trying hard. We were successful in getting the Postal Service emergency funding to help them deal with the increased volume through COVID in the last COVID packages, but making sure that funding is being spent on operational changes that will actually help is really important. And we're hopeful that in potential infrastructure spending or other spending packages, we can unlock some additional resources for the Postal Service, because we know they need it. And again, I'm always happy to chat with you all offline. Our shipping team is always available. We know that this is a point of contention for you all. We appreciate your engagement on it, and we want to hear from you. So thanks. I'll pass it back over to Matt.
Perfect. Thanks, Ashley. So Kevin and Shana touched on this. There's a very organized and consistent attack against marketplaces that's going on both at the state and federal levels. And it's been going on for about 2 years now. And so there are a number of bills that are being proposed, some of which have fairly high possibility of being signed into law, which attempt to restrict what can be sold on platforms, how they can be sold, and by whom from a third-party perspective. And so all of those issues are fundamental to eBay and providing the service to you all and your ability to sell and to run your businesses. And so it's a big fight that we've been going through over the past few years, and it's really starting to ramp up now, where You have more more stakeholders involved than you ever have before, and there's more interest in it than there ever has before. It's politicized a little bit, but there's a lot of misinformation about why bills are being sponsored in order to go after marketplaces. Some are going after specific marketplaces, but we get caught in sort of the tailwind of that, which is unfortunate. And so we're going to be doing a lot of work, and we'd like to work with you all quite a bit throughout this year and next in order to, like I said earlier, either help these bills so that they can be beneficial to you all and to eBay as a marketplace, or adjust them or prevent them from moving forward until they can be beneficial to you all as small businesses. It's a really interesting time. You have sort of this joining of all of these different issues on consumer protection, anti-China consumer goods, anti-tech. And so they're all sort of being joined together in order to go after marketplaces, which we think is a little disingenuous. And so it's going to be a uphill battle, but we're optimistic that we can get some good wins or solutions out of it, and that will only be possible with all of your help. So happy to chat more specifics about that in the Q&A section, but I will leave it at that and turn it back over to Christiana.
Thanks, Kevin and Shana and Matt and Ashley. I'm going to actually turn it over to Sharon. She's going to moderate our Q&A. Just wanted to highlight some Zoom functions. So you guys have pretty much already figured out where the Q&A function is. It's awesome to see and hear from a lot of you. But again, if you have a specific question about anything you heard or maybe things that you want to hear more of, feel free to post it there and we will answer it live. So Sharon, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, great. So we already have two great very interesting ones. Kevin, I'm going to call on you. If you want to turn your camera and video on and your microphone on. So we have a question about if they're going to require seller verification, why don't we require them to have buyer verification? I think that's an interesting idea. Would you like to comment?
It is an interesting idea. I think hadn't really thought about it from that perspective, but you raise some interesting points. I guess, how I look at this issue, and again, my purview is in the States. So how I've kind of viewed this issue is really, some of the rhetoric that Matt was alluding to was kind of the demonization of third-party sellers who are using online marketplaces. So as Matt said, it seems a little disingenuous in many respects to try and work on sort of that verification legislation at the state level, given that it really is, it's pretty apparent that it is sort of an attack on a business model and, being led by some pretty large companies, brick and mortar companies, that it seems a little difficult to try and redirect to have that discussion. Now, definitely would be very interested in learning more about, some of the buyer verification piece, because I'm familiar with some stories, but I think getting a better understanding of that to give a more complete and thorough answer. But, again, really, I think a lot of this legislation is definitely attacking, many of you here who are selling on online marketplaces. And so I think that is what we're up against when we're talking about these seller verification bills at the state level.
Right, and just a few bad apples, of course, spoiling it for everyone else.
Yeah. I guess just to add to that point, I mean, obviously we want to create ensure a platform that has trust. I mean, you are competing against other sellers, for business, and so certainly that's important. So if there are bad actors, we want to remove them. But if somebody's buying, I think that is an interesting point. Certainly worth learning a bit more about.
Because we do know that from experience, there are some bad buyers out there as well. Hey, Ashley, I wanted to call on you for this one, if you don't mind. Teresa raises a good point about that I haven't thought about before either, is the difficulties in processing postal insurance claims, that is becoming more and more difficult. Do you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of their systemic issues, right? They're having a hard time. I mean, none of their tracking is working, as you all know. I'm a big buyer and seller on eBay. And I sold a baby book that I had never used on eBay. And this poor woman contacted me and she said, I'm about to have my baby and the book hasn't come yet and I can't afford a new one. So, and there was no tracking that had shown up, even though, you know, I had obviously sent it. So I issued her the refund and then it got there. And, you know, hopefully she got her baby book in time for the baby, although we all know that she won't have time to fill it out now that she has a baby. But they're having huge issues with tracking for insurance purposes. We have been hearing that they're not issuing claims, with miscommunication between policies at the retail point and, you know, higher up. We're aware it's all linked to their just systemic problems of they're having a lot of people calling out sick because they're having a lot of people contracting COVID. They don't have the means, the workforce, the equipment to deal with the volume that they're getting right now. They're underfunded. They have bad funding mechanisms. They're poorly run. Like it's all systemic. So I'll raise this again with the shipping team. It's something that our shipping team has discussed with our commercial partners over at USPS. But yes, we understand. Thanks for raising it.
We received a question in advance of this, which I think goes to, may help answer Kathy's question as well. That's in the Q&A box. I'm going to call on Matt for this one. Matt, tell us a little bit about the techlash and the anti-tech sentiment that's in Congress and how those impressions might be bleeding into eBay when, of course, our business model is completely different and we're a platform that enables small business, but sometimes we're getting lumped in with those bad actors.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think sometimes I like to characterize it that we're guilty by association, not by practice, but just by who we are as a model, right? So there's a couple of different levels to that. I think one, you have the antitrust concern, right? There are 4 or 5 large tech companies that are under investigation or are being discussed as under investigation for antitrust issues or anti-competitive practices. And so members of Congress and consumer groups, interest groups will sort of go after those companies from a bunch of different angles, one of which is through increased transparency or restrictions on the platform, which is what we're seeing a little bit with these seller verifications and product restrictions or platform liability changes. Then you get on to the actual liability question, which is, you all may hear in the news the term Section 230. It's kind of a buzzword, and it's turned into a panacea of if you change Section 230, all of the quote unquote tech problems will go away. We get dragged into that as well a little bit. And people try and go after platforms for that as well. And then specific to the marketplaces, I think it was brought up in the chat, you know, the role that marketplaces have played throughout the pandemic and allowing people to still shop and get their goods in a safe manner without having to go in person. That in itself goes to the drive from, I would say, the opposition groups who are brick and mortar retailers who don't like that trend. And so I'm speaking fairly candidly here. And so there are different ways that they can, those groups can address the problem, and they're trying to go after market equality or equity. And so they're trying to impose additional regulations on us so it's more difficult for us or for third-party sellers to sell online, thus driving folks in person, if that makes sense. So I'll kind of leave it at that. We could talk for hours about just this issue itself, but I would say lawmakers, regulators tend to conflate all of these issues. and it's our job to deconflate those and to educate them on why they may be right or wrong on them.
And Matt, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question because I think it's important. So it seems to me, and probably others, that the techlash is a bipartisan issue for different reasons, right? And so that's why you're hearing more about it. It's not a left-wing or a right-wing issue. It's really both, although they come at it from different angles.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of the unfortunate side effect for us is that normally you have people on both sides, but they've sort of like met back at on the back side of that circle, if that makes sense. And so that's one of the difficulties of it is it's not a single view issue, right? Like it's not a single party issue. And so we have to address it differently according to the audience because different concerns require different solutions. If that makes sense. So that's a really great point, Sharon. It complicates the whole issue quite a bit.
Yeah, and I did want to address, there was another question in the Q&A about can eBay take responsibility for the Postal Service tracking issues? That's really outside of this group, but we certainly can pass along any of all these concerns to the shipping team. And the more I think about it, we may want to think about doing a seller roundtable or seller focus group with SPAN just on postal, because that seems to be the hot issue, and have some shipping team folks come here. So maybe that's our next quarter. We can do that. I see a question about when is the next fly-in going to happen. We are thinking about doing a virtual fly-in potentially in May. So, if you are interested in perhaps meeting with your member, let me know or Christiana know. So that's that. We will not have a physical fly-in probably until 2022. We're following similar guidance, I think, that we're getting from eBay as a whole, but hopefully, we can always cross our fingers and hopefully that might change for the fall, but who knows? What else? Anything else out there? Well, thank you. It is on the East Coast, it's almost 4:55 on a Friday, and we've had such a nice turnout. We really appreciate you all coming. And if we didn't get your question or you'd prefer to ask us directly, just please email us at government_relations@ebay.com. Most of you all have Christiana or my email, so don't ever feel shy about just emailing us directly. And one ask we have for you today is we're really trying to expand the SPAN network. So if you want to recommend a seller, or I know many of you have either Facebook groups you're involved with or meetup groups, if you could give a little plug to the SPAN program and encourage people to apply, the link is there, but it's actually even easier than that. You can go to ebaymainstreet.com/SPAN and get to it. So, and again, please refer, sellers who are interested in public policy and who would be great additions to this group. So happy Friday. Keep in touch, and I'm sure we'll be following up with all of you soon. Take care. Bye.